traditional custodians of the land that we're all gathered on today. Here in Brisbane, it's the Yagara and Turrbal people, and we pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, acknowledging the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. We have someone not on mute. So just a reminder, everyone, just as usual, we are recording this clinical design group meeting, and we will place the recording on our website. So please, if you don't want to be on camera, please just turn off your camera, so that you won't be videoed or recorded. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Welcome to the first meeting of the year. In today's agenda, we will be giving some updates around AUCDI, update around R3, the AUCDI design principles that we've been working on, as well as the criteria for tagging data elements, data groups in AUCDI as core. We'll have an update on the clinical focus groups, as well as we'll be diving into a little bit of content for AUCDI, thinking about birth data values, and having a discussion around pregnancy state, and then going over next steps and upcoming events. So thank you everyone for joining us. Last year was a really big year. Last year we published AUCDI R2. Now AUCDI R3 is well underway with finalising the last bits of the content. We had 4 face-to-face CDG meetings, as well as 6 online meetings, and we also held the clinical focus group, and we had 5 online meetings last year. But this year, I think we've already had 2, and we're only in January, so I think it's going to be a really big year. I've just got a couple of updates here for anyone who's interested. The first one on the list is the Spark program review that was published just, I think, at the end of last year or early this year. This was a program review from the Department of Health, where they have independently assessed the Spark program and looked at its progress and impact in advancing FHIR standards for the digital health interoperability. So they did 18 months of phased engagement where they looked at the beginning, the middle and the end of that 18 months and looked at how Spark has grown, as well as the community. So if you're interested, I think it's a really interesting read, and it's really cool to see the reflections on the community in there. So it's definitely worth having a read. The other thing that we were also mentioned in a working paper developed by the OECD, and it was around the personal health data systems in OECD countries. So they're looking at that personal health data and transforming how individuals engage with health systems, creating new opportunities for trust, innovation, improving access and quality of care. So it looked at Spark and its relationship with My Health Record as a case study for Australia, as well as other countries that were doing work in the personal health data space in the OECD space. Was there any other interesting updates, Kate?
Yeah, I think we are also expecting another OECD paper to come out earlier this year. Spark was reflected as one of 3 globally leading digital interoperability programs in OECD countries that led into a workshop, and we're expecting that to come out in a paper within the next few months, hopefully. And I think it's almost weekly we're having conversations with other governments around the world, really looking at what's happening here in Australia. How can they learn from our experiences, both in terms of the content, but also more importantly around how the community is coming together of industry, clinicians, government, consumers working together. So once again, a huge thank you to everyone for all the effort and investment into this program within the community to better connected care within Australia, but also importantly, the world's watching to see how they can learn from this and leverage this. It really is a global effort that's going on. So yeah, really exciting to see that the effort is being recognised, all the hard work you guys are putting in.
Thanks, Kate. So now into the updates. So the first set of updates I have is around AUCDI. Just a very, very quick reminder around what AUCDI is. So AUCDI really specifies the clinical information, the clinical requirements, and their corresponding data elements and terms that should be included for data entry, data use, and sharing of information to support that patient care. And that's what we're doing here in the clinical design group. But the other part of Sparked, which is the technical part, is really looking at AU core and those FHIR implementation guides, which is really about specifying how that core set of data and information should be structured, accessed, and shared between systems. So that's just a quick, but if you want more information, you can find it all on our website. There's a bunch of videos as well, but if there's anything else that you were after, please reach out and we're always happy to chat about these things. As most of you know, we're up to AUCDI release 3. Our first release was really focusing on that core of the core and really just starting to build out that foundation. With release 2, looking at patient summary, chronic condition management, and starting that encounter information journey. And then for release 3, we have been working on chronic condition management, thinking about assessment scales and scores, thinking about that encounter record, and also addressing some of those backlog items. So we are building AUCDI in an iterative way. And over this last 7 months, we have been increasingly adding new content to AUCDI. So at the beginning, we identified some health assessment areas. Assessment of function was something that we're looking at as well, because we're thinking about how does the information from AUCDI can be used within aged care as well as child development. So that's another one there. And then early in the year, in this financial year, we also did a series of CDG backlog pitches where members from the CDG identified things that were important or of high priority to them, and we have picked out these ones here and included all of these in AUCDI R3 as well. So the scope of AUCDI R3 kind of looks like this now. It's getting bigger and bigger. So we have updated some of the adverse reaction risk summary and the biomarkers, vital signs and measurements, as well as implanted device summary, but we've also added some new ones. So the health assessment, functional ability, developmental milestone summary, and vaping summary. I've got a question around the assessment of function being able to use for disability and DIS. Definitely what we're trying to do is build, I guess, use case agnostic data groups that can be used anywhere. And that's the data, it's kind of the data that sits underneath a lot of those assessments. So we have been talking about functional status and what does that mean, and recognizing that functional status is not something that can be measured by one thing alone and is a suite of things. So looking at functional ability is the first one we're looking at, but we will also be looking at functional dependence as well as functional impairment. And those bits of information should be able to be foundational for people using it in the disability sector as well as NDIS, as well as aged care, and kind of across the whole of the health ecosystem.
Nicola's got her hand up.
Yes.
Just a follow up rather than typing it again.
Sure.
I'm assuming that will be across multiple areas, so physical, cognitive, mental health, etc. So that.
Yeah. So we've tried to make sure that the scope of it makes sense for as wide a range of things as possible, but we would love to test it. So if there's specific things that you would like us to have a look at, can definitely have a look at it. We have been looking at some of the international and other standards out there like ICF to make sure that while we can't be exactly the same because they all have different purposes, that there is an alignment and ability to map across. We've also been talking to AIHW and the Aged Care National Minimum Data Set to make sure that we're kind of aligned and walking together, because they're in their development phase of their NMDS and looking at that sort of functional information in the next year or so. So definitely trying to be aligned, and we have spoken to various areas of the department to try and make sure they understand that we're doing this and does it align, or is there conflict? So trying to stay as aligned as possible.
Have you spoken to the team for the National Disability data set?
I'm not sure which group they are. So if you're able to help provide some details, we're definitely able to reach out. Yeah.
I'll send you their detail. I'll send the details after this meeting.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nicola. The question from Adrian, is medical device also going to patient summary when required? I think that will be something that we'll need to do going forward. I think we did a original scoping of patient summary, and I think probably in the soon future, we need to, relook at it now that we've added additional content to AUCDI based on other requirements, we do need to do a refresh to see, hey, we've done release 1 or we've done an MVP of patient summary. What does the next lot look like? So watch this space, Adrian, and we'll definitely get your feedback there.
That will start going to scoping soon within the technical working groups, because AU patient summary R1 will be going out for ballot as a standard, and they'll start scoping what should go in AU patient summary R2 very shortly after. So yeah, absolutely, Adrian. Now that we have this in the AUCDI model, that allows the technical group to start scoping the technical implementation guide.
So what that looks like in detail, I won't go through this, is like the detailed AUCDI R3 content. So for AUCDI R3, we've almost finalized all of the content. We may have some last additions today. So we'll go through that in a little bit, but we are planning to publish that for draft public comment. It is currently scheduled to be released Monday, 15th of February, and we'll have it open for 4 weeks. The release that you'll see will focus only on the new and updated content only, just so it's easier for review. But when we do publish the AUCDI R3 in June, it will contain all of the new and updated content, as well as all the things that were in AUCDI R2. Just like previously, our target audience is anyone who's interested. We really do want that broad points of view and not any one specific area. We really would love to have as much feedback as possible. So you don't need to have any specific skill sets or professional background. You don't need to be clinical. You don't need to be technical. You can be any of those or anything in between. We very much welcome all feedback. Once it's been published, it will be available on the Spark website. We'll obviously send out emails, and it will be probably on our socials as well, so you guys can keep an ear out for that. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was the AUCDI design principles and the tagging of core within AUCDI. So in the November face-to-face meeting in Canberra, we did 2 exercises where we started to revisit these things as we've been kind of on this journey for 2.5 years now. Maybe it was time to refresh. I did do an update of this in the last CDG in December. So if you wanted kind of a little bit more, feel free to have a listen to that. But these were our core design principles for AUCDI R1. We developed them within a workshop, but we thought, maybe now is the time to refresh. So as a group at the CDG in person, we took these and asked the room whether we should update these, which ones should we keep, which ones should we update, and what should we update them with. So we had a bunch of feedback there. There was a lot of agreement with the...
Is there any chance you could... Sorry, I've just got a meeting.
Sorry, you're just not on mute. Thank you. There was a lot of agreement with the principles as they were, though there were some changes that were requested, and there was a couple of ones where we should remove them. A lot of the time was because there were duplicates or whether we were saying the same thing twice. So there was a few different comments here around, simplifying some of the information. Think wording was a bit clunky. Could we use different wording? There was feedback about refining and making sure that we consider the secondary data use cases. There was things around supporting person-centered care and translation. There was a few things around, being able to make sure that we are aspiring to something going forward. There was a whole bunch of things around, duplication or rephrasing things. So we've taken those and I've kind of tried to update these. So I thought we could merge some, and rather than making them single line principles, make them 2 or 3 line to kind of give them a little bit more nuance and make them a bit more clearer. So for example, the reduced duplication, single entry, single development, multiple use and reuse have kind of separated out the wording to reduce duplication of effort for data entry and development, and this enables reuse of data and technology to minimize redundant work. So trying to separate these out, clean them up and just make them a bit clearer. The support person-centered care driven by a clinical quality and safety use case. I got a lot of feedback that we should include or incorporate the WHO integrated person-centered or people-centered care details. So I have updated this, and that's where that wording comes from: ensure effective, safe, and people-centered care to support timely, equitable, integrated, and efficient health services. I've brought the two together around no data for data's sake and driven by primary clinical data use, not secondary data use needs, and sort of bringing those together to make sure that we emphasize that collecting data for meaningful purposes and not just data for data's sake. I think the other two are more or less the same. And I have also incorporated the national and international standards together. So use national and international health data standards and align with national initiatives. Examples including HL7 Fire, Open EHR, My Health Record, Health Connect Australia, SNOMED. But I've added in there recommending and developing appropriate terminologies to support data entry and reuse. And I think this one was something that we had originally put in the criteria for core, which I'll go through in a minute, but it kind of really sits as an overarching principle within AUCDI, because AUCDI really is about not just exchange, but it is that making sure we have good quality data right from the beginning. So it was important that we try and support, good structured coded information right from the beginning. And I think for the last one, I just expanded it a little bit to say support all health and care settings, domain and care modalities across life course and ecosystem to ensure applicability across diverse environments and contexts. So what it looks like now, so I think from 9 we've gone down to 7, but each one's a little bit longer, but hopefully a little bit clearer. So I was just wondering if there's any feedback on this. We are planning to do a request for comments, so we'll put it out on our website and there'll be a form so you're able to provide any feedback. We'll have that feedback open for 4 weeks, and then based on the feedback, we'll see if we can finalize it from there. So was there any comments just based on this now? If anyone had any feelings, otherwise I'll move on. Okay, I'll keep going. Thank you for the thumbs up. The other thing that we were looking at, and so in November, the other thing that we were looking at is what does it mean to be core? So when we started AUCDI Release 1, it was originally Australian Core Data for Interoperability, but as we added the additional use cases, it made sense that we've reached a point where it's developed, it's matured, we've kind of grown into this idea of being more clinical data for interoperability. So we changed the name in Release 2 to Australian Clinical Data for Interoperability, because we wanted to make sure that it reflected it, that it was more than just the core common, but it was also supporting across the person's life course, the health continuum, and across the health ecosystem. So that kind of left the question, what does core mean then? Because the technical design group do have this thing called AU Core, and that was very much linked to the things that were in AU Core Data for Interoperability in Release 1. But now that we are expanding our scope to clinical data for interoperability, we need to then explicitly define what are the things that we are identifying as core, which then the Sparked AU Core TDG can take as our requirements for what feeds into their prioritization and development backlog. So they'll take those. So what does it mean for the AUCDI content that is core? So at the November CDG, we proposed criteria for the inclusion in core, and that was AUCDI core. And those criteria were have to meet these criteria, being included in AUCDI and has sufficient appropriate standardized terminology, and one of the following criteria. So systems can support now or with minimal effort, supporting a strategic roadmap with an agile iterative process, is required by the TDG for AU Core, or supports multiple CDG recognized use cases, so 3 or more, and across at least 2 identified care domains, trying to reflect that core common that sits within the definition there. So the feedback we got was quite varied. There was a reasonable amount of agreement or agreement with some changes, but some of the feedback kind of was a little bit There wasn't super strong feedback except for the part around terminology, where it was really important to note that terminology maturity shouldn't dictate inclusion. So if there isn't terminology, it shouldn't be an exclusion criteria for it to be called core, and we can develop that terminology over time, which is why I thought we can move the terminology into the AUCDI design principles, but perhaps take it out of the core. The rest of it was kind of a little bit mixed. There was a few questions around how many use cases is the right number of use cases, and I think we won't really know until we try it a little bit and see. So I think while we may pick a number for now, perhaps we leave it at that and then look to reassess in a year and see whether it makes sense. So I have taken out so what I'm proposing now for our criteria for tagging content in AUCDI as core is just the following criteria. The systems can support now with minimal effort is required by the TDG for AU core, or supports that multiple CDG recognized use cases. So this is my proposed criteria. I've just simplified it down, and I think alongside the AUCDI design principles, maybe this makes a little bit more sense. So again, happy to take any feedback now, but also we will put out a request for comment, and people can feel free to provide that comment. It'll all be on the website and on our social media probably, and you can either email us, but there will be a form there for you to fill in. Did I have any comments on that one, or I might just move on? Feel free to get in contact, but also we'll have that form out, so you feel free to drop us your information there. So yeah, that's our next step. So obviously, as I mentioned, request for comment, but in the meantime, we will start to develop the process for tagging things as core in AUCDI, and we will bring that process back to the CDG. But I think just to kind of circle back to what Adrian was talking about in terms of scoping, I think we need to also start thinking about what is the process and have a fixed process around how do we rescope these things, because we do have the chronic condition management stuff. We also have patient summary. So how do we, ongoing keep maintaining these things and rescoping them as we mature and develop? So that's another thing that will be on our list of things to do. So that's me for the AUCDI. I might pass to Tor now to give us some updates around the clinical focus groups.
Yeah, if you jump to the next slide. So I guess to set the scene, we've now got the 2 clinical focus groups through Sparked. So we've got the chronic condition management clinical focus group, and we have the patient summary and encounter clinical focus group, the group formerly known as the AUPS clinical focus group. So for those that aren't aware, the purpose of the focus groups really is to bring together a smaller group of our clinicians who participate in the CDGs, clinicians and consumers importantly, to have that targeted discussion and input to tease out issues and develop materials ahead of consultation with the broader Spark clinical design group, or where we might have a discussion in a CDG and need to have further exploration to help mature and progress things for Sparked and for the clinical design group. So it's really to help to provide input to enable discussion of the different clinical use cases. And these focus groups, we can stand up or stand down as needed, depending on what the requirements are for Sparked. So just wanted to set the scene that although it's only the end of January, we've already had two clinical focus group meetings this year, one for chronic condition and one for patient summary. We are intending to have another meeting each respectively before we have the face-to-face event down in Hobart, so that we have some materials to take to that face-to-face event. If you jump to the next slide, please. So firstly, just to give an update around the chronic condition management clinical focus group. So the purpose of that group is really to talk about what those clinical requirements are for chronic condition management. And at the moment, the focus of that has really been around exploring what the considerations are regarding the GP chronic condition management plan MVP template design. So it's really trying to think about what those clinical design requirements are, what the specific fields are that need to be included, and the usability considerations for developing the GP CCMP MVP. So in terms of validating the solution design requirements, that's taking the input that we received at our Sydney and Canberra face-to-face workshops and making sure that we're updating and incorporating that clinical feedback appropriately, and then also working with the clinical focus group around what the specific fields are that need to be included on that MVP template design. So building out a that first iteration of a fire questionnaire template for the GP-CCNP, what are the specific fields that need to be included, and then also trying to work through some of those usability considerations in regards to how those fields need to be structured on the questionnaire, thinking about what needs to be linked and how it's used, and for the different fields that are included, where goals and problems and treatments interventions need to relate to each other, and how those workflows might look like. In terms of the solution design requirements, these may be familiar to those of you that were at our November face-to-face. We presented these based on the initial feedback we had from our Sydney face-to-face discussions in the middle of last year. Overall, we had general support of the at the time we presented them as principles. One of the main pieces of feedback we received was that they're not principles, they're actually design requirements, and those design requirements are specifically for the MVP. That's important to think about, because in writing these, we wanted to be really clear about what we expect from the MVP and and not excluding what might be future enhancement or future desired functionality that later designs of a shared care plan or a chronic condition management plan might look like. So we had overall general support of what the design requirements are. There was what we presented to the November CDG. We then updated and incorporated the feedback, and we represented these design requirements, you see on screen now, to the clinical focus group. Some of the feedback from the clinical focus group that we received was around the use of allows versus supports or enables, making sure that although we know we want to have structured and coded information, when filling out the chronic condition management plan, there is also a space for free text, and it needs to be clear that we don't lose sight of the need for there to be the ability to also record free text information in the chronic condition management plans. There was just some need to clarify around the use of copy to and save to, where we've used that in the design requirements, and also thinking about the fact that although this is a GP chronic condition management plan as the MVP, you still may have multiple clinicians or users contributing. For example, the patient may see the practice nurse or a health practitioner prior to seeing the GP, who might input information into the form before they then into a draft form that is then picked up by the GP to complete. So just needing to refine some of the specific wording. So we'll incorporate those additional requirements into these design requirements. And then a finalized version for discussion will be our intent is to bring it back to the broader CDG to make sure that we've captured the feedback appropriately, and that we are continuing to articulate what the needs are for the MVP. So if you jump to the next slide. The other thing that we worked through with the chronic condition management group, clinical focus group, was around those specific those specific fields that are required. So in confirming what the key fields that are necessary to have on the form. So thinking about the chronic condition, problems, goals and treatments, services, other fields as well. So we've already talked through with the group things like patient details, clinical practice details, practitioner requirements, things like that. And so also in thinking about the specific fields that are required to meet MBS billing and things like that, we also wanted to talk through what are the additional or supporting fields that are necessary. So we had some questions for the group around, if we have a goal, is there a target date? Is there a provider? Who's the initiator, owner, status, etc.? So we're still working through what some of those requirements look like. And we will be continuing that discussion at our next chronic condition management clinical focus group. And the other thing that we're talking about with the group and that we need to delve into a little bit more will be what fields are required for the different purposes, how they could or should be linked, and what the clinical workflow looks like. So we did propose in terms of, and importantly, the functionality for those fields that the smart form will support. So we did propose sort of an example of how we thought we might be able to structure some of the fields and the data in filling out the chronic condition management plan, just to help start thinking through what those usability considerations are. We got some really great feedback to start with. We had thought about it in terms of, being able to articulate what the problem was, what the goals associated with the problem was, and interventions and treatments. But we heard quite strongly from the clinical focus group that actually it's not just a list of problems that needs to be captured on this form, but rather we need to think about what the goals are, first, and how that might be then supported by some of those other fields. So we're, working through what that needs to look like. And Liam is building out actually how the form will work and what those requirements are. So that is an ongoing process that we're continuing to work through with our clinical focus group. Next slide. So moving on from chronic condition, we've now got our patient summary and encounter clinical focus group established. So this was previously the AU patient summary clinical focus group, which was established, I think, back in October 2024, where we had initially established a patient summary clinical focus group to start thinking about what the materials were, the patient summary journeys. We worked with the clinical focus group initially to build out 5 patient summary journeys, develop the patient summary definitions, and pull together what those materials were that were needed for patient summary. As the Spark program progressed and we continued discussions around AUCDI, we also had those discussions around what reason for encounter was, and that grew into also exploring what other encounter-related information looked like. As we explored what the reason for encounter and encounter-related information looked like, it became clear that there was this interplay and link between patient summary information, encounter information, and how they feed off each other and update, and the encounter information may be used to update the patient summary information. And so when looking to establish a clinical focus group to start exploring more deeply the encounter requirements, we thought it would be really valuable to continue to have that expertise that had started the patient summary materials continue to help contribute to the encounter materials, but expand the group and obviously give an opportunity for those that had joined a little bit later on to also participate in the clinical focus group. So that's how we sort of went from having a patient summary only clinical focus group to patient summary and encounter clinical focus group. Bit of history there. So the purpose or the focus, that we have within the focus group for these 2 meetings for the start of the year is really wanting to understand what the clinical requirements for encounters and encounter-related information for exchange are, reviewing and validating the encounter-related definitions that we proposed at the Canberra face-to-face workshop in November, and then also creating some consumer patient journeys to help illustrate the use of the encounter records and where or how an AU encounter record might fit in. If you jump to the next slide. So in terms of discussing the encounter definitions, one of the things that we did want to highlight, or that did come up with the clinical focus group, is why do we even need definitions around this? And for Spark, the purpose is really to be able to have, to enable the discussion of encounters, encounter information, AU encounter record for exchange through Spark. So being able to clarify when we're discussing encounter information, do we mean what's recorded and collected, throughout the whole encounter? Do we mean what's recorded and collected and documented in your clinical information system or EMR? Or do we mean that encounter information that's for exchange or for updating a patient summary or for use more broadly? So it's really just trying to have in our program and in this environment, the ability to consistently communicate that meaning when we start talking about the different aspects that make up an encounter and encounter information, encounter records, etc. So what we had proposed at the face-to-face event in Canberra was 5 definitions. So that was encounter, encounter information, encounter record, AU encounter record, and history of encounters. So if you jump to the next slide, what we heard back from the group was really just, in principle, there was, sort of general agreement. We did get some mixed feedback and sometimes contradictory feedback when we were reviewing the worksheets, but generally it was for the encounter information definition, the encounter record definition, the AU encounter record definition, and the history of encounters definition. There was only minor changes required, so small tweaks to wording where instead of any and all, we've updated it to all and things like that. So, but what became really clear is that encounter as the base level definition is really where we need to have that detailed discussion. And in the focus group, that is where we spent most of our time discussing around the definition. And what came up was the need to be able to understand what an encounter is versus what it isn't. Encountering issues, yes. But we're working through them. But what we really saw, which is something I think is a theme throughout everything we do in Sparked, is that we really need to take that pragmatic and iterative approach. So in developing an encounter definition, what we're doing is creating a starting point for us to be able to potentially build on in future, but to give us the language to talk about now, what we need that is useful to enable the discussions necessary for Sparked. So it's trying to think about, what is a pragmatic definition that we can start with that can be applied across, the different environments and the different types of encounters that we're trying to articulate. And it may be that to start with, we start with something that, is a bit broader and we can build on it over time. So if you jump to the next slide. So this is what the definitions are looking at the moment. So you can see they're very basic because we just need enough information to be able to facilitate those discussions. As I said, the last 4, they're pretty much, unchanged, very minor tweaks. We are still rewording these. So if any of you that are online from the clinical focus group, don't take these as gospel, we'll discuss them at the next meeting. But importantly, the encounter definition at the top it needs a bit more in-depth discussion. So we'll continue that in the next meeting. Next slide. The other activity that we've been talking through is obviously creating the encounter record patient journeys to help illustrate where we are wanting to build out where an encounter record might be used and exchanged. So we had done a bit of work around creating a draft proposal, a story proposal for the CFG to look at and give us their feedback on and make sure that we don't have any or too many clinical unrealities. It's a new term that I've learned, embedded in the journey. And so in this journey, we are proposing that we would cover some of those initial use cases we discussed when thinking about what the encounter record MVP would be. So thinking about a GP consult, a GP telehealth encounter, 1-800 Medicare, urgent care clinic, pharmacy, ambulance transfer, and ED admission. And then we've just got on the right there, you can see the care team that's involved that we've highlighted. There are some further changes that are needed based on the discussion that we had in the focus group. And if you jump to the next slide, we wanted to call out that we want these journeys to be able to show where does the encounter record fit in and get used. Where does the encounter information need to be shared between providers and organisations? So what are those handover and transition of care points? Where does different types of data need to be recorded and shared? And then in looking at the first journey that we proposed, we saw that that was just one small slice, and we know that. We ideally would like to create an additional journey to highlight some of those things or those use cases that we haven't covered off. So thinking about a journey that might include an allied health encounter, maybe a mental health, a medical specialist, or some other roles for consideration. And we also importantly want to make sure that in our discussions, we capture any additional scenarios that we may want to build out in future, because we are aware that obviously we're just creating these examples to facilitate what we can for MVP, but as we mature, we may have additional use cases and journeys that we want to build out as well. So I think next slide. Just in terms of what we're doing with the CFGs and where we're heading, for the chronic condition management, we've got the ongoing development of the chronic condition management plan, and our intention is to continue to make those changes to the solution design requirements, finalise what those required fields are, and then have some additional discussion around the usability considerations. Ultimately, we're hoping that we will have some level of draft MVP that we'll be able to share with the with those that are in attendance at the Hobart face-to-face event. And then with patient summary, we'll continue to work through what the encounter definitions need to look like, and then refine what the first journey proposed for the patient summary, for the encounter record looks like, and then creation of a second encounter journey. So all outputs from these clinical focus groups will then be, they will be uploaded to the Spark website. So anyone who's interested can look at those outputs as we develop them, but also importantly will be brought back to the clinical design group for comment and feedback, because we want to make sure that everything we're doing with the clinical focus groups also resonates with our broader Sparked community. So yeah, I think that's probably a very, very quick update on hopefully on what we've been doing with the clinical focus groups. I will just pause there if there are any questions or if anyone has any feedback.
Probably just to acknowledge there's a great conversation happening in the chat.
Sorry.
Between Oliver and Chris, and yes, some important comments from Patrick as well. And I think those comments are really important. We're trying to learn through this and understand what did and did not work in relation to event summaries. But importantly, this kind of move to encounter record has come from, those can remember way back May 24, reason for encounter kind of came into our work program, and through a lot of conversation with a number of you through the various CDGs, we unpacked what reason for encounter was and what was really needed from that clinical context. Also understanding that with the whole conversation around patient summary is something that you believe should be derived from the information that sits within the system, either within your own source system or within the My Health record or through Health Connect Australia and the Future Discovery Service. Well, for that data to be able to be available to be derived for patient summary or to support things like data for population health, we need to define that data that sits in these encounters that comes into the CIS systems to start with, and then what should be exchanged or accessible through My Health record, point-to-point sharing of information if required, or also through Health Connect in the future. So I think there's been a lot of drivers for it, but we also very much should learn from what we've learned over the last kind of 15, 16 plus years around how to make sure that we make it usable, useful, accessible. And so all of those aren't coming to Hobart. You're going to miss out on a great combo, because they're the things that we're going to unpack. And Chris and Oliver, I hope you're ready for it. And very much, Patrick, I think that's also where some of the conversation is. Where do we first start? What makes sense as everything we do in Spark, pragmatic? What's our first minimum step? Let's not eat all the elephant at once. Let's start. And, where is that first sensible starting place to look at the implementation of Encounter Record as well. And so I think, yeah, really good comments. So thanks, Patrick.
And the only thing I would add to that is that, we really are focusing it, while we have to do all these definitions and things because it needs to give us context, we're really focusing on the data. And even though those encounters are different in different settings, we believe that a lot of the data that sits underneath that is core and common across those. So if we can at least define those things, and yes, we need to understand a little bit more in terms of requirements for specific settings, but I do believe that there is a core common set of data that sits behind those. And yes, a lot of those will cover off the primary care settings. I think that's the ones we do, I guess, have explored the most in the past, but they will probably sit under all of the different encounters. And as we progress this, like we're starting with an MVP, as we progress this and understand requirements for, a medical specialist versus an allied health versus what happens within a hospital setting and all the other sort of aged care and everywhere else, we want to explore those, but know that, there is some core common data that sits under that. And yeah, they're supported by different workflows and different other requirements as well. So it's a work in progress.
And we do understand encounter is an overloaded term, which is why we're trying to get a shared language for Spark, knowing that there are other definitions for funding purposes and all the rest of it. If anyone wants to come up with a better word, we love it. I kind of feel like in this game we could be playing encounter bingo. If it was after 5, maybe it'd be an encounter drinking game, and every time you had to say encounter. But so if anyone's got a better word, love it, because events kind of overloaded, encounters overloaded, but we got nothing better, guys. So the aim is to get that shared language. And for James, yeah, absolutely. So we are working hand in hand and planning hand in hand the February face-to-face with our TDG, with our Fire IG colleagues. So the aim of this session on the Wednesday in Hobart will be a joint meeting of the CDG and the TDG to really make sure we can hand over from a clinical point of view what's been coming out of the clinical focus group and the CDG meetings to date, to work with the tech design group and make sure we're aligned on this. And then it will be a full day of the tech design group, of which thank you to all those who are coming to both, because it's important to keep the clinical and technical aligned, where it's really that start for the technical industry to start to look at how does this get picked up and what's feasible within the tech side. So it's going to be a great, I'm excited. If only for Chris and Oliver to continue this debate. I'm excited, guys.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, well, we might move on, and I'll pass to Nai to kind of delve into some of the data content that we're looking at to add to AUCDI. Nai?
Hi everybody. Thanks, Kylene. Yes, so what we're going to do now is, as Kylene mentioned, we're going to go through some of the data models that we've been looking at, and in particular, I'll take you back to October. If we could just jump to the next slide. This is our roadmap on this slide. So this is taking us through exactly what we're proposing to publish in AUCDI R3. So you can see we've got the assessment of function, we've got functional ability at the top. Child development has developmental milestones and head circumference. And I'm going to circle back to that in a sec. And we had some priority backlog items. So in that we had blood pressure, pulse, adverse reaction, risk summary, head circumference, vaping summary, implanted medical device summary, and medical device. Encounter record is to be scoped, and the health assessment data group. So when we were looking at what we needed to fulfill AUCDI R3, and if we could just jump to the next slide, we included head circumference. And on this slide, this is the proposed data model. So you can see at the bottom, we've got the information model or the mind map that we've been using to describe the concept, so the clinical concept. So we know that head circumference is a really important measure to take the distance of the largest part around the head, which is our concept description. And this is what this is the content that we're intending to publish for AUCDI R3. And the purpose is to record the physically measured head circumference of an individual. And you can see at the bottom on the pink square on the left-hand side, we've got recording one instance per observation event with a health record. And the birth head circumference is an exception and represents the first measurement recorded at or soon after birth, which should be recorded only once per health record. So thinking back to our roadmap, we were looking at the child health record, and so we've added in birth event here, which is the date and time of the first head circumference was measured at or around the birth event. So we took that on board, and this is what we discussed back in October. So this has already been put through to the CDG. And if we jump to the next slide, Kylene. We know that the head circumference is a really important metric in babies as it reflects the brain's growth and overall development. And abnormal growth can signal developmental delays or potential neurological issues. So what we're trying to do here is really articulate very, very clearly why we need this separate data element to represent birth event. And so the context of which this data element and the content we're going to use to describe it is the recording of a head circumference at birth represents a clinically significant baseline that should be treated as distinct from all subsequent head circumference measurements. And while the distinction is not enforced as a separate structure in the logical model, the model is designed to support an important separation at implementation. And implementation should ensure that birth head circumference measurements are handled and interpreted separately from all other measurements. So just reflecting on how we approached the head circumference and what we needed to record a baby's head circumference for that particular birth event, and then subsequent measurements over time, we started to look at what other growth metrics we might need to include to capture and fulfill some of the child development requirements that we need. So if we jump to the next slide, and if you remember back just to the published AUCDI R2 back in July, we had body height as a published data group in AUCDI. And what we're looking at doing today is adding in the birth event, so the date and time when the first body length was measured at or soon after birth. So now we'll have, in AUCDI R3, we'll also have head circumference, but we'll also have body height. So you can see the orange arrow at the bottom of the slide is indicating that we've now got this birth event as a candidate for AUCDI R3, and the roadmap of body height or length has the body height length measurement. It has an any point in time data element measurement, and it also has a birth event date or time measurement. So what we'd like to do now is, if there's not any questions from the group, or before that, if there's any questions from the group, we're happy to take those. But if the CDG is comfortable with this approach, we'd like to put it forward to a Menti. But before I do that, I can see Oliver has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just asked a question in the chat because I was looking at this and thought, how long after birth does it still count as a birth head circumference? And in fact, are we really just talking about the first recorded head circumference? And is there anything conceptually different about that from subsequent measurements? Because when you look at the circumference, the data was measured, and compare that to the date of birth, you can decide, does this count as a birth one or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I might default to Heather to enter into the chat and help us to address that one.
Afternoon, everyone. It is really just trying to get the semantics clear, Oliver. I mean, we can do it by querying if we wanted to find the first date that we've got, but there is the capacity for us to be able to label this as a birth event, meaning it is basically the baseline that we can then compare future growth on. And if you haven't got a complete record, you don't necessarily know what the birth measurement was. So this is a repeating pattern so that we can actually anchor this as the baseline, the first one that we've got. And so that's why it says at or around birth, or at or soon after birth. It's not necessarily at a particular time, but it's the first one we've got that we can actually anchor and then work out what the growth parameters and so on that flow on from that are, the growth velocity, etc. So there is some semantics in it clinically that's important, but yes, technically you could do it that way if you've got a complete record.
Well, even if you haven't, it's just the first recorded head circumference and it was done on this date. So that's what my question is. You need to label the first one specially as birth. And how long after birth? A month, a year? What are you going to call the birth head circumference?
That's a clinical decision, I think. I mean, if you've got a 2-year-old, you shouldn't label it as the birth one.
Well,
But
you
that-
hope not, but
That
yeah.
might be your first one, and that's, I guess, part of the issue. This is a clinical decision about this is the label we put on it. There's no fixed rules around that because we don't actually do it. But I think most people know what we mean by it. And, you know, if it's 2 weeks or 2 months afterwards, which you can then actually see from the date of birth, you can decide whether that's a relevant baseline or not.
Yeah, it seems unnecessary to me to put the special label about birth on it, but I'm happy to go with whatever people think's best.
Can I interject? I think it is important to say that it is a birth event. Yes, there can be measurements done up to the time of birth, Kim Drever, paediatrician. But yes, like the first one taken, it could be when they're 5 years old. I accept that, but obviously that's ridiculous. We know that wouldn't be their birth weight, birth thing. But the fact that it is a birth event, if it's 12 hours after, within 24, 48 hours after, I think would be a reasonable assumption. If I saw birth event, that's what I would assume. And it's the first physical time someone's put a tape measure around a child's head. And then hopefully with a complete record, you can see with that label that this is the birth event where it fits in the story, because it may have been someone that's been tracked intrauterine, or it might be somebody who's, you know, born early or whatever, and then, yeah, I've seen them later on. I want to know. It tells me other things too, because if it happened around the time of birth, that person is receiving care, somebody who knows how to take it. So it tells me some social determinants of health as well. If it's many, many days after the birth date, you know, as the first head circumference, that also tells me something. So, yeah, I think it is important to label it birth event.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kim.
Adrian.
Okay. Oh, sorry. We've got Adrian.
My question was about gestation. So obviously, a baby was born at 24 weeks. The head circumference, the normal head circumference, is going to be quite different to a baby born at 40 weeks as the normal head circumference. So, and you'd have to go searching for the gestation to actually work that out. So, should it be included within the initial requirements, so that you have an idea with the gestation whether that's a normal birth head circumference or not, because it is quite different depending on the gestation.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thanks, Adrian. What I might do is actually defer that particular question for a little bit later on, because we're going to have a little bit of a discussion further on in a bit more of the data groups that are coming later on in this session. So could we just hold that question maybe and carry it over until a bit later on? Okay. Okay, so are there any other questions about birth event before we jump to the Menti?
So did you want to jump to the Menti now? I guess the question is, are people, because if I go to the Menti but we haven't answered the question, like Adrian, would you feel comfortable, or do we need to kind of,
or do we need to explain it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
It's
that's a good point.
Like, as in, I'm happy to switch to the Menti, but I don't know, Adrian, I guess, because Phil Lawyer's also asking around the gestational age and the linkage. So I don't know if that's, Heather, did you have anything that you can contribute?
I've got my hand up, yeah. So, I mean, gestational age is important across a whole lot of parameters and a whole lot of parts of the record. If we tie it into body height, then we're recording this, you know, basically we can be repeating things in different places. So the intent is for this to be recorded as a standalone data group that would be committed at the same time to help interpret the actual measurement, those kinds of things. If that's relevant at that point in time, it should be there, absolutely, because it will help you determine if it's normal. But we're not working out if it's normal. We're just recording the measurement. And so that interpretation of normal has to be done in context of perhaps a whole number of different other data elements as well. So you're absolutely right about the interpretation, but this is purely about each discrete measurement. And in that case, I think it's not, we wouldn't put it in each measurement where it might be relevant. We would actually be recording it in a more specific way. So your point is absolutely correct, but I think not for inclusion in this data element, this data group. Does that make sense to you, Adrian? You're looking.
I understand your logic, but my logic working in practice would be different. Is that I would want to know the gestation or the gestation immediately when I saw the head circumference to understand whether it was meaningful or not.
But we're not talking about screen design and the sort of process logic, I think, here. And I agree that you need to see that on the screen to be able to make these kinds of determinations. This is about just how we record these three measurements that we're proposing and having this birth event related to them. And then the notion of being able to make appropriate conclusions or follow through processes and so on needs a whole lot of these parameters, including that, are they premature? What were the other issues around the birth? All of these kinds of things would change what your, I guess, processes would be about how you act on that measurement or not. So this is just, it's just like if it was an adult, it's just the measurement. We wouldn't want to know about their weight at the same time because that's recorded using the BMI data group, things like that. This is about these discrete concepts that we're just trying to define very succinctly and very specifically.
I think
Okay, Phil?
Thanks, Heather. So I agree with you on the thought process. So, and that's where my head was kind of going of, for it to be interpreted appropriately, you probably do need to understand a bit of the gestational age or have, some sort of other documentation that the baby was essentially at term, et cetera, some of those kinds of thought processes. So I agree that that's not part of this data group, but I don't know if there's some way to show some sort of linkage around that. That the two might need to be together, even though they are 100% distinct concepts. And I think my other thought here is again, if we're going back to, the statement that this is just the measurement at a particular point in time, and then I go back to kind of Frank's original thought here of, I don't know that I need to tag the at any point in time event versus a birth event separately at a conceptual level. And then my head starts going into technical implementation and can I actually convince clinicians to do an extra tag or use a different field, et cetera, for some of those concepts. So that's where I guess in my head, I'm kind of thinking going, if we say we're just showing it's at a point in time and the interpretation of that result is going to be based on other information, other UI, UX, et cetera, which then might be very close in time to the actual birth date and time and the gestational age, or could be way far away. Do we really want that separate tag or want to force, that separate clinical decision of this is the birth time so that it can be, this is the measurement related to the birth time because it is somehow special or unique from all the other measurements that might be, in the record, consolidated, whatever, right?
Sure. Look, I mean, it's optional. I guess that's one thing. Clinically, Kim's suggested that this is an appropriate thing. Internationally, it's gone through review and that's something clinicians have asked for as well. So it's optional, it's not mandatory. And it's, I guess, something that we can work towards from an implementation point of view if that's what the clinicians want. But the idea of the linkage, I mean, conceptually, yes, but to what degree and to what extent? Because, we could say there's all sorts of things that could be linked to this, and it could be other developmental milestones, it could be problems diagnoses. So you want to know that they've got microcephaly or hydrocephaly or other brain issues, or there's all sorts of things that will impact this. And I think this is a general issue around all data groups in AUCDI. There is always going to be connections and linkages that will impact each other, and we can't anticipate all of those. When we get to things like the the patient summary, then we're going to start to associate things together that are connected. When Kim works on a pediatric minimum data group or whatever it might be, we can start to see those connections become apparent in that data set and how that might be displayed on a screen, etc. So I think we're trying to decompose all of that and look at these discrete data groups so they can be used across any kind of use case. But all of those kinds of things that you're bringing up are reflected in the implementations and the particular practical applications of what we're trying to achieve with the data. We can't do it all together. And I think we're just trying to, separate those layers out a little bit, that this is agnostic of any use case. And so the question is, from my point of view, is this adequately representing how a body height or length in a supine infant can be recorded appropriately? Just that concept. And not all the rest withstanding, all of that, I totally agree. The context is important, but this is just about the measurement.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I think it's a really good, important thing that you raise there, is that sort of differential axis that we're looking at the concept from, and that is that, we're trying to capture all the data that relates to the length of the baby from the birth right through in a longitudinal health record. So, if we think about systems in terms of a future state, that's potentially what you might be able to query on, is the body length or height over time. So thinking of it from that perspective might help. It's not ruling out all of the other data groups that we need when a baby's born. That's not what we're saying. It's just saying that we just want to capture the information around body height, so then we can start making clinical decisions around how, like those growth indicators, about how well that baby's growing over time. Would that be fair to say, Kim? Kim's an expert in this area.
Yeah, Kim's an expert in some things, and then she gets completely discombobulated. So the birth event is an optional field. Is that right? At the moment? Okay.
Yes.
So then I'm more inclined to agree with Frank and Phil, as they were saying. Frank's saying clinically, and I think Adrian as well, I don't really need it because I can find that somewhere else to interpret it. So do we need to include it in this particular measurement that we're trying to agree to enter? Yes, that would be my thought, as long as I can lift it out somewhere. So if I look at a metric, I need to know when it was. To my point earlier, was it the ultrasound that was had 10 hours, an hour before the Caesar, which then 2 hours later someone took do I need to have birth event as a compulsory element in this data archetype? Is that the right way to talk about it? I would say probably doesn't need to be compulsory, but I do need to know when it happened, on what day and at what time.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I just wanted to raise the other use case. I guess why knowing that it was a birth event, it might be useful, is not necessarily in an EMR, but if it's in like a baby book or some other form or assessment that has been done, and we know that, just to identify that it is the birth event and not just don't want to say random, but like at another point in time, date time measurement. So sometimes, yes, if you are in the hospital and you have an EMR and you know the exact birth time and you're able to pick those out, but there are other use cases outside of an EMR where it might be actually useful to be able to identify that this is a birth event date.
And you don't have the supporting information available to know that the birth was on a specific date, but
And
you can
time.
tag that this was the birth event related measurement.
Yeah, so I mean, I get that conceptually, but I guess I sit there and kind of go, I feel like that then becomes the logic that's used by that birth book application, right? And so, do we make an assumption and have our asterisk that it's just the first, in this case, height/length, since we're not talking weight and other pieces, but is it the first one that's documented across all the systems that it has access to?
Yeah, but it
Or,
could
you
be
know,
a first
until we know
event.
a birth date is set or something, and then it's the first one that's equal to or after that.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
think
an
this,
assumption, right? But like, I don't know that we'll get clinicians or systems to somehow uniquely identify this as a special height length that then can be positively communicated to you know, other systems downstream in mass. There may be a system or two that will do that, but in mass, I don't think we'll get that. At least that's not today.
yeah, and I'm comfortable that it's not today, and I think we're trying to allow the option to do that. So as Heather said, it's optional in that systems don't have to necessarily implement it, but if they wanted to, and if we are maybe from a mother's like a baby book, like something that a mother is inputting in there, they're collecting that information. They will know. They will be given that information. It might have come from a system like yours, like an EMR, but they may enter it in themselves. So they would want a way to designate that this was the birth height, weight, head circumference, and then other measurements that they collected over time can also. So I think this is trying to give us a way to collect that information where it is necessary to identify it specifically. And I appreciate that maybe in a hospital system or other system or en masse, it may not be, but I think this is giving us that option to do it, and then the implementations can decide whether that is what they're going to do or not. So I think from that's kind of, I think the driver for the head circumference birth weight really did come from the child health check.
The First Nations health.
Yeah, the First Nations health check, where they specifically have a birth head circumference, or they had the head circumference information there. And I guess it would follow the same. We thought that it made sense that if we were including the head circumference as a birth, like an identified birth head circumference, that it would make sense to get the birth body weight and the birth body height and just add those in as precursors. But if it doesn't make sense, we can also pull those back. But in this case, it is a way, it's to allow a way for us to do this. Adrian, are you next?
Can I just suggest that we include gestation as an optional field? It doesn't have to be in the first iteration, but in the future iterations, because it only needs to be recorded once. Once it is recorded, then it can go into all those the birth, the head circumference and the length.
So having gestational. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, but particularly if you're a GP who sees a patient who's been born somewhere else, you don't have any access to any of their birth records. So having that information is really important.
Yep. So identify, let's say gestational age is a backlog item because it's really important, and to prioritize that. And I've also noted, Kim, the uterine head circumference measurement as well. I've noted those down to go into the backlog as important additional measurements. Are there any other, Kim?
Sorry, I've probably just put it in the thing. Gestational age is very important, but it's going to be a tricky one. It needs its own little, as you say, it's on the backlog, because it's always an estimate. It's always an estimate. And then it's, to what extent do we assert that it is actually what it is based on, you know, the measurements that are taken prior, if that's possible, or at the time of, depends on the last menstrual period, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sounds simple, but it's pretty tricky. And then you have corrected age, which is only relevant up to a certain time after birth. And then we don't count it as being something that is important for everyday health decisions. So, it's good that it's on the backlog. We do need to get to it. And it's a very important thing to include.
And I to note Nicola's point in the chat, if a birth event occurs out of hospital or remote, having the date, time of birth and then the date, time measurement, would it be clear then for a child health record? That's another maybe. Heather or Nye, do you have any more comments? I am curious to go to the Menti to see whether people are comfortable with us including birth event as a body height, as part of the body height data group, noting that gestational age is on the backlog and we should start to look at that soon. Heather, Nye, did you have any other questions? Otherwise, I might pop to the Menti and see.
No, I was just going to respond to Kim's comment before, that if she was to receive, let's ask the question, I guess, to receive a referral from a GP and they're able to distinguish this is the latest head circumference or body length or whatever, body weight, versus what the birth one was. The semantic distinction is important. And if we're using, the same data structure with just tags or dates, it's less semantically clear. So there is, this is the kind of thinking behind it. And it's possibly about exchange where it actually shines in that situation rather than in a health record, where you could do a query and find the date time that was closest to the time of birth. So there is some value in these kinds of things, I think, and that's why it's proposed. But yes, it's optional, and perhaps, the proof is in the pudding. Do we think it's worthwhile adding in that kind of use case, or do we want to leave this out at the moment? I guess that's what the Menti needs to decide.
Okay, so I've got this Menti here. Let me find the QR code, but otherwise menti.com 65522951. So you can opt to agree with the proposal with no changes, agree with proposal but minor changes, and please let us know in the chat what they are. Otherwise, disagree with the proposal if you think that we should leave it out for now, or you can abstain. This is I'm quite interested in this one. It's an exciting one. So we do have quite a few people on the call today. So if everyone or as many people can please vote, even if it is to abstain, just so we know you're awake, that would be really great. I can't see it based on this thing. Oh, we've got about 50 people in the room. Okay. So it looks like so far, I might just give it another 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to get, apparently there's a timer on this thing. Okay, another 10 seconds, unless someone just yells out and says they're still voting. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, Patrick, were you giving me the finger? Okay. Thanks for that. I think that's abstain, Oliver. I have no idea what this is about. I think that's called abstaining. Okay, so it looks like people are comfortable with including body, the birth date on the body height. So we're going to take that as is. It will go out in the draft for comment next month. So if you have any strong thoughts that you haven't had a chance to express, either do it in the chat, let us know ASAP. Otherwise, feel free to provide that commentary back to us during the draft for comment. And I think I might quickly, and I think no, we probably don't need to go, is we also want to do the same for body weight. Maybe I might ask if we can just go straight to the Menti to see if people are happy for us to do that, just in the interest of time, or if there's any comments, other comments or questions before I go to the chat, please go to the vote. There's any, okay, well, I might jump straight to here. So same business. If you don't know what we're talking about or fallen asleep, please abstain. If you disagree or wish that for us to not include it, pick that disagree with proposal, otherwise agree or with changes. If there are minor changes, can you please let us know what you're thinking in the chat, or put your hand up and let me know. But keen to hear what you have to say. Definitely also, we are keen to think about all those other things that should be on our backlog if they aren't already. So if there are some things, please let us know. If this is, triggering off any cool ideas for AUCDI, definitely keen to hear it. Heather, I've only got 10 minutes left. Do we want to progress with the pregnancy discussion, or should we save that till the next one?
I think we could start it and just start to socialise it, because that's all we're trying to do. If everyone's got their brainstorming hats on.
Yeah, and they're in that pregnancy maternal.
And you're in an argumentative mood, please, let's do this. Clinicians.
Yeah. Okay, so all right, well, I'm
a constructive mood, not arguments.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so baby brain, yes, baby brains is what it is. All right, well, looks like I've got a reasonable majority here. Again, it will go out in the draft for comments. So if there are any outstanding concerns, questions, please feel free to provide those or put them in the chat or send us an email after this call. But quickly, because it is going out for draft for comment probably in 2.5 weeks. So we are really working to finalize that stuff now. All right, Heather.
Okay, so this is early socializing, trying to get some feedback, but we may not have much time for it. But all the same, I want you thinking about it. This goes back to March 2024 in the e-requesting CDGs, where we started to talk about what we often see on some of the lab and imaging forms about pregnant, yes, no, or just pregnant tick box and so on. And we were trying to respond to that. So there's some of the sort of discussion that happened in that form there, but I don't really want to go through it in detail. The result was a pregnancy assertion, which I'll talk about in a minute. I did just want to highlight this notion of the shades of grey around pregnancy, preconception, certainty of pregnancy, etc. And that's really where I want to go today, to think about that and how we want to record that in our health records. So I think it's not something that's done well, and it's something I think we need to be able to consider about how best we want to record that. Next slide, please, Kylene. So this, again, a little bit after that, as a result of e-requesting, we looked at what the scope of a pregnancy domain might be and all kinds of details we might want to start to look at. We currently have in AECDI Release 2 the expected date of delivery, the last menstrual period, and the pregnancy assertion, which says pregnant or not pregnant, very deliberately, very narrow, as a specific statement or declaration by a patient. And what I want to focus on is this kind of notion of a pregnancy phase or a state or something like that. So that's what the purpose of this is. But in order to frame that, I want to move into what we did with pregnancy assertion. So again, next slide, please. This is published in AECDIR2. It's a very specific thing that's only applicable at a specific point in time as we're about to make very critical, clinical decision making about treatment options and things, to know that a clinician is, it's quite easy to say they're pregnant, but saying that they're not pregnant is something that we agreed was important to be able to do, and based on a justification, which is one of the data elements, and then that date of assertion. So it's only valid at the point in time when that pregnancy assertion was made. So it's a very specific use case, which is quite narrow, but quite important, especially when we were trying to compare that to what was happening in FHIR and the International Patient Summary around the values or pregnancy status, being pregnant or not pregnant. That not pregnant is something that clinicians take very seriously and has got medico-legal implications. Next slide, please. But how do we do all of the rest of the stuff around saying that someone is pregnant? And I want to flag that this is different to what is the pregnancy status in FHIR and IPS. So I don't want to call it pregnancy status. I've gone to pregnancy state, but I'm thinking pregnancy context, or there's all sorts of things. I want to think about the name. Certainly we're not locked into this. Next, please, Kylene. But in practice, pregnancy matters before it's diagnosed, before we know they're pregnant. It matters differently once they're confirmed as pregnant, and it matters when they're no longer pregnant. The notion of not known does not equal not relevant either, although it's the assumed default for most women who are in childbearing age. And I think the issue is that different pregnancy states impose different care requirements, including before and after a pregnancy that's diagnosed. Because we're going to treat a different care pathways, we're going to act differently in how we manage that woman and how we assess risk. Next, please. So most clinical systems only have a pregnant flag. It's just binary, it's on or off. And I think this gap creates unaddressed clinical safety issues. And as we do more related to automatic clinical decision support and AI, that's going to be amplified even further. So that's the kind of background I want you to think about, because at the moment we're dealing with this very simplistically. Next slide, please. So this is what I want to discuss. And as I say, we've only got a couple of minutes left, so maybe it's more let's think about and hold on to that for next time. consider that continuum related to that pregnancy context or pregnancy state. We know that premenarchal, it's not an issue. We know that postmenopausal, whenever that's defined, is also not an issue. So if we think about a continuum from possibly pregnant, possible with reproductive intent, which I'll explain, probable, confirmed or diagnosed pregnancy, and then resolved, these are different states we need to consider in how we care for a woman through that, the different states of pregnancy. And they'll go backwards and forwards a number of times potentially over their lifetime. Next, please. So possible designations require different pathways. Next. So these are values that I'm suggesting for consideration relating to each of those states on that continuum. So possible pre-pregnant, meaning that they're actively trying to conceive, cease conception, undergoing fertility treatment, that they are probably pregnant, but we haven't confirmed it, that they are definitely pregnant, but we've confirmed it and diagnosed it, and that there is basically a resolution of that pregnancy. The postpartum, post-miscarriage and termination, I think, is something we don't often consider, but should actually be part of our care pathways, and certain things are going to need to be required at that time too. And also epidemiologically, we look at the early postpartum phase and the late postpartum phase, and there are clearly clinical things that need to be dealt with there. This notion of possible is really what we consider default for anyone. You know, it bookended with premenarchal and postmenopausal, but we consider that default, that they may be pregnant until proven otherwise, effectively. But we never record it. It is that default assumption that sits behind in our minds all the time, every time we see a woman in that age group. And in practice, we assume it, but we never actually write it down. So do we need to actually write that and record it? But I think there is this continuum, and I think we need to think about how we want to record these kinds of things as we trigger better care, using decision support, etc., into the future. I think probably we don't have time for any discussion, honestly. Helen, will we just briefly rush into the next bit to finish?
Yeah, and I think maybe we can pop this somewhere where people can give us our thoughts. So we'll pop it somewhere in some kind of form so that we can get some early thinking. If anyone has any really strong thoughts around it for now, we definitely want to hear it, and that can feed into our development of it. And then we'll bring it back again and have time for a proper discussion when at the next stage. So I guess watch that as another request for comment, and then we can then bring this up again and have another discussion, because I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you have any immediate feedback right now, you can always just email the Spark box as well.
Yeah,
that's always an option when we're presenting this.
Yeah,
I think it will generate quite a lot of discussion, and we can't do it justice today, so we should raise it again.
Definitely, and I think we did want to, because we've only got 2 minutes left, really did want to kind of highlight our contributions, as the CDG's contributions back into open air. The work that we're doing here at AUCDI, as a lot of you guys know, we're leveraging Open EHR, using them as a starting point, and that's really allowed us to kind of turbocharge and get us as far as we have so quickly. And we have been able to really leverage that clinical input and clinical governance that has had open air, has been through the open air processes. But in the same way, where we have developed clinical requirements and built our own models or things that Heather and I have been doing, we are actually looking to contribute them back. So Heather, did you want to, in 30 seconds, explain where we are at with it?
I think it's just nice to touch on this, so sorry to rush it. This is relating to the work we've done recently that you've been involved in around the functional ability data group that is coming into AUCDI R3. I just wanted to highlight that that left box where we are starting with open air. In fact, it started before open air, and the thinking about it came from a Dutch group, or Dutch government, who are building these things called ZIBs, that generated the thinking that built into that activity of daily living archetype. It started the discussion in AUCDI in those two middle boxes. We started looking at it and calling it functional independence as we understood it better. It's actually evolved to functional ability. And now that that's been locked down for what we're proposing in R3, we've taken this back to open air. And this is about to go through an international review in open air in a complete, a major revision basically of what was originally reviewed and what is now going to be proposed. So this is where the sparked work that you and I are doing here as a group in CDG is actually going back into that open air international space. It will go through an international review and it will validate or identify additional issues we can bring back. Looking at this to and fro collaboration. If you would like to get involved in this next archetype review, which is about to go out this week, please let me know at my private direct email down the bottom, or if you lose that, just come back to Sparked and they'll let me know and we can walk you through how to get involved. That's it. Over to you again, Harleen.
Thanks, Heather. So it's really exciting that we're able to kind of contribute back. So yay us. And then quickly in the last, minus 1 minute, upcoming events, as I mentioned before, R3 will come out mid-February for 4 weeks, so please pop that in your diary to know. The February CDG is coming up. Kate's kind of talked about it already, but we will be looking at that chronic condition management plan MVP that Tor was mentioning earlier that the CFG is also looking at. So that'll be the morning session, and then the afternoon session is that joint CDG-TDG, where we will get further updates from the CFG, and discuss the scope of an AU Encounter MVP as well as usability considerations, really leveraging off the presentations that we got in the November CDG. So we kind of taking that, bringing it forward, but also bringing the TDG into the conversations to make sure that they hear what we need to say. Upcoming events, there's the CDG-TDG. In March, there's a working HL7 AU working group meeting and connectathons, as well as the online CDG. April 22nd is the April CDG, and we will be having a face-to-face in May, and I think we'll be doing a little bit of the AUCDI R4 scoping there. So we'll let you know as soon as there's any dates we've got that when we have it confirmed. And I think that is all I have to say. Yes, I think Maddie's put that in the chat. There is the CDG in February in Hobart. It is sold out, but we do have a wait list. So if you're really keen, please put your name down the wait list and we'll do the best we can to see if we can squeeze a few more people in. And Maddie will hate me for saying that. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Really appreciate all the time that you're putting in, and we will see you at the next one. And watch out for the AUCDI R3, please. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Someone have their hand. Oh, no. Okay.